For weeks, I had felt that something wasn't right. At first, it was just a slight discomfort in the back of my mind, a whisper I tried to ignore. But the feeling only grew stronger with each passing day, gnawing at me, never letting go. My wife, Rachel, had been acting more distant than usual. It wasn't anything overt at first. No sudden arguments. No obvious signs of betrayal. But something about her was different. Her phone, for one, had become a constant presence between us. She never left it unattended. She used to leave it on the kitchen counter while we ate dinner, casually checking texts here and there, but now it was always face down, screen turned away as if hiding something. Whenever I reached for it, she would quickly grab it, almost defensively, like I had done something wrong. And the late nights. Rachel had always worked late, but it was becoming a routine. She would say, "I've got to finish this project," or "I have a last-minute meeting," excuses that used to sound believable, but now felt empty. Her meetings stretched later into the night, and it wasn't unusual for her to come home after 9, sometimes 10, or even later. But when she did come home, she was always tired. Too tired to talk, too tired to even kiss me on the cheek like she used to. The change was subtle, but it was there. And when I asked her about it, her answers were always the same. "You're overthinking things. It's just work. I'm stressed. Okay. Trust me, nothing's going on." But deep down I knew. There was something off about the way she said it. Something in her eyes that didn't match her words. The tightness around her lips. The way her voice faltered for just a moment when I pressed her too hard. I could feel my stomach twist with anxiety every time she came home. I had tried pushing the feelings down, rationalizing them, but it was no use. The questions kept creeping into my mind, and no matter how much I tried to ignore them, they wouldn't go away. What was she hiding? It wasn't like Rachel to act like this. We had always been open, comfortable with each other. There were no secrets between us. Or so I thought. I had to know the truth. I just couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. And my gut, it was screaming at me. I knew I couldn't let this go any longer. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. The doubt, the fear, the endless questions swirling in my mind. I had tried to ignore it, to chalk it up to my overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew that this feeling, this gnawing intuition, wasn't going away. That evening, as Rachel told me she had another late meeting at work, something inside me clicked. Enough was enough. I couldn't sit by and let the unknown eat away at me any longer. If she wasn't going to tell me the truth, then I would find it for myself. I wasn't the kind of guy to be suspicious. I trusted her. I wanted to trust her. But every time she said she was working late, something inside me twisted. The way she avoided eye contact when I asked how her day had gone, the way her fingers danced nervously around her phone, constantly checking it as if waiting for something. I could see the cracks in the facade. I couldn't shake the thought that she was hiding something or someone. I stood there for a moment, watching her grab her keys and head toward the door. As always, she gave me that half-hearted smile, the one that wasn't quite as genuine as it used to be. "I'll be late tonight," she said, almost as an afterthought. The same line she'd been using for weeks. But this time, something in me snapped. I wasn't just going to let this go. With a deep breath, I grabbed my car keys, telling myself that I wasn't going to let my paranoia control me. This was just about getting clarity. I needed to know if my suspicions were just that, suspicions, or if there was something more to it. I waited for Rachel to pull out of the driveway. As soon as she did, I slid into my car, heart pounding in my chest. The idea of following her made my palms sweat, but I didn't hesitate. I kept a reasonable distance behind her car, making sure she wouldn't see me in the rearview mirror. It was like some sort of strange, twisted mission. I wasn't proud of it, but I couldn't help myself. The need to know the truth outweighed everything else. She turned down a street I didn't recognize, taking a route she had never used before. My heart skipped a beat. Where was she going? She passed several familiar intersections and kept going. I was trying to remain calm, but the closer we got to unfamiliar streets, the more my mind raced. What was going on? Why was she taking a route that didn't lead to her office? She kept driving, turning left, then right, until we were several miles away from home. I had to focus, making sure I wasn't drawing attention to myself. There was a strange feeling in the pit of my stomach. Was this really happening? And then she pulled into a parking lot. But it wasn't a parking lot of an office building. It wasn't a meeting spot. It was a motel. I watched in shock, my heart racing like I had just been hit by a train. She parked her car, and as I looked around, I saw several other vehicles. Some I recognized, some I didn't. But it didn't matter. This wasn't just a late meeting. This wasn't about work. Rachel stepped out of the car, and for a moment, everything in me froze. I felt like I couldn't breathe. She walked toward the entrance of the motel. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. I was too far away to hear her, but I didn't need to. I had already seen enough. But something kept me there. I couldn't leave. I had to know what was going to happen next. I couldn't make myself move. My eyes were glued to her every step. And then, as if the universe was mocking me, someone else appeared. It was a man, tall, dressed in a sharp suit, looking confident and casual at the same time. He walked toward her with a smile, and just as she reached him, they embraced. Not just a friendly hug, a full, intimate embrace. Then she kissed him, and that was it. The last of my doubts was crushed under the weight of what I was seeing. She wasn't at a work meeting. She wasn't just stressed out. My wife, Rachel, was having an affair with this man. I followed her discreetly through the neighborhood, making sure I stayed far enough behind to not raise suspicion. My mind raced, my heart pounding in my chest as I kept my eyes fixed on her car. Every turn, every street felt like it was stretching my patience to the limit. She didn't know I was behind her, didn't know I was watching her every move, but something in the pit of my stomach told me I was getting closer to the truth. She drove with purpose. But where? The familiar streets turned into unfamiliar roads as she turned left, then right, taking a route I had never seen her take before. My stomach clenched with each turn. Where was she going? I tried to make sense of it. I had always trusted her. But something wasn't right. I could feel it in every nerve. The way she had been acting, the way she had pulled away, her constant defensiveness, it all led to this moment. And now, as I followed her further away from home, I knew I was about to find out why. She took a sharp right down a street that didn't look like anything I had ever seen. The buildings were older, the area quieter. The cars on the street seemed to get fewer and fewer as we passed. My mind raced. This wasn't her usual route. She was heading toward a part of town I didn't recognize, a neighborhood I had never seen her drive through before. Then, as we reached a dimly lit corner, she slowed down, pulled into a parking lot, and stopped. My heart dropped when I realized where she had parked. A motel. The sign above the motel entrance flickered in the dull light, its neon letters barely legible. It was small, old, and run down, nothing like the hotels I thought of when I imagined business trips or work meetings. The paint was chipped, and the windows were dark, a few curtains hanging limp and untouched. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I couldn't believe it. Why was she at a motel? I parked a block away, trying to keep a safe distance, but my hands were shaking uncontrollably as I tried to process what I was seeing. The knot in my stomach tightened, and I realized that the woman I thought I knew, my wife, was leading me into a reality I wasn't prepared for. I sat there, frozen, trying to make sense of it. My mind raced through a million questions, but none of them made sense. Was she here for a work event? Was this just a coincidence? But as I watched, she got out of the car, and that's when I saw it. She didn't just grab her bag and head inside. She was looking around, making sure no one saw her. Her body language, so nervous, so aware of her surroundings, sent a cold shiver down my spine. She glanced over her shoulder once, twice, then hurriedly walked toward the entrance of the motel. My heart hammered in my chest. Why was she here? She had to be meeting someone she didn't want me to know about. I kept watching, holding my breath, the world feeling like it was closing in around me. The silence of the street seemed deafening, and yet I couldn't move. I didn't know what to do. What would I find if I walked in there? What would I hear if I followed her inside? But I didn't need to follow her. I already knew. I knew I wasn't following a work colleague. I wasn't following a late-night meeting. I was following my wife to a motel, and I had no idea who she was meeting, but I was about to find out. My breath caught in my throat as I sat in my car, watching Rachel's figure disappear into the motel. The air around me seemed to grow heavier, each second dragging on like an eternity. I couldn't believe what was happening. She was here, at a motel, and every part of my body screamed that something was deeply wrong. But I had to keep it together, had to stay calm, and gather the pieces of the puzzle before I confronted her. That's when my eyes fell on the parking lot again, scanning the area just out of habit, trying to see if anyone else was around. The silence outside was almost too much to bear. My heartbeat was a dull thud in my chest as I looked at the other cars parked near her. And that's when I saw it. A sleek, black SUV parked next to Rachel's car. At first, I didn't think much of it. It wasn't unusual to see a few cars scattered around in a motel parking lot, especially in a quieter part of town. But as I stared at it, something clicked deep in my gut. The way the light hit the paint, the unmistakable dark tint of the windows, the brand, it was all too familiar. That SUV, I knew that car. It belonged to Kyle. My stomach dropped like I had just fallen off a cliff. Kyle, the man Rachel had been spending more and more time with over the past few months, the one I had never trusted, the one who always had the perfect excuse to be with her, the one I had seen too many times lingering in the background of her texts and emails. It was no coincidence. This couldn't be happening. I stared at the license plate, and my heart seemed to stop. I had seen that exact plate before, parked in Rachel's driveway a few weeks ago when I had been out running errands. Kyle had left his car there for hours, even though he was supposed to be working on a project at the office. At the time, I had dismissed it, chalking it up to a coincidence or an emergency. But now, it was clear. Rachel wasn't just working late anymore. This wasn't a late meeting or a business dinner. This was something else entirely. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, and my breath became shallow. A sickening wave of realization swept over me. I had suspected something for weeks, but seeing that black SUV parked next to her car, seeing that Kyle's car was right there, it was too much to ignore. I felt like I was about to suffocate under the weight of everything. This was no longer just a nagging feeling. It was a hard, cold truth staring me in the face, and I couldn't look away. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The anxiety in my chest felt suffocating, like I was drowning. I thought about leaving, just driving away, and pretending I didn't see anything. Maybe I could convince myself it was a mistake. But I couldn't. Not anymore. I needed answers. So I sat there, eyes glued to the parking lot, watching as Kyle and Rachel were now bound together by something I couldn't deny. The quiet of the motel lot felt deafening. The seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity as I waited. I had come here for clarity, but now, all I could think about was the crushing weight of betrayal slowly suffocating me. Rachel was inside that motel with Kyle, and nothing was ever going to be the same again. I sat there, paralyzed in my car, staring at the motel entrance through the rearview mirror. Time felt like it had slowed to a crawl, each second stretching into eternity. My heart was pounding so loudly in my chest that I thought it might burst. My fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles were white, and yet I couldn't bring myself to move. I had to see this through. I had to know. Every part of me screamed to turn around and drive away, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. But I couldn't. I couldn't unsee what I had already witnessed. The image of Rachel's car, Kyle's SUV parked next to hers, the sickening realization that I was watching my worst fears come true. I wasn't going to leave without the truth. The motel was eerily quiet, the dim lights casting long shadows across the parking lot. I kept my eyes on the door, every muscle in my body tensed. I knew she was in there. She had to be, but I didn't know how long I would have to wait. And then the door opened. My breath caught as Rachel stepped out, looking around quickly, her hand shielding her eyes from the dim light, as if making sure no one was watching. She walked toward the entrance, and for a brief moment, my heart filled with hope. Maybe I had been wrong. Maybe she was just getting something from the vending machine or meeting a friend. But then, as if on cue, Kyle appeared. He wasn't just some acquaintance. He wasn't just a work colleague. No, this was different. He stepped out from the shadows of the doorway, looking every bit like he owned the place. His body language was casual, confident, like he was completely at ease in a way that made my skin crawl. As he saw her, his face lit up with a genuine smile, the kind of smile I hadn't seen in months. He walked toward her with the kind of familiarity that cut me to the bone. Then, to my horror, Rachel, my wife, threw her arms around him. She didn't hesitate. She didn't think twice. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him close, like she had been waiting for this moment all along. And then they kissed. It wasn't a quick kiss. It wasn't a friendly peck or a simple hug. No, this was different. The kiss was slow and deliberate. Their lips lingered on each other, as if they had all the time in the world, as if there were no consequences. It was a kiss that said more than words ever could, more than any excuse Rachel could ever offer. My stomach churned. My entire world seemed to spin as I sat there, watching them, watching my wife kiss another man. In front of me, every second of their embrace was like a blade to my chest, each moment carving deeper into my heart. My head was spinning, and my hands were shaking. This was the truth I had been avoiding for so long, the truth that now stood in front of me in the most excruciating way possible. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a betrayal that went far deeper than I could have ever imagined. My heart slammed in my chest, and I had to fight the overwhelming urge to burst out of the car, to scream, to confront them both. But I didn't. I couldn't. I wasn't ready to face it just yet. I had to sit with this, let the weight of it settle over me before I could act. I watched as they pulled away from each other, Rachel smiling, in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. It wasn't the smile she used to give me. It wasn't the smile of the woman I married. This was a smile that said she was getting exactly what she wanted. And that was when I realized just how deep this went. I wasn't just watching her with another man. I was watching the woman I had loved for so long, the woman I had trusted completely, destroy everything we had ever built. I felt sick, but I didn't leave. I couldn't leave. I needed to know what came next. Everything I had feared, the worst possible scenario, was suddenly standing in front of me, staring me right in the face. The world around me seemed to slow down as the realization hit me like a freight train. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. Each beat a painful reminder that everything I had believed was just a lie. This wasn't just a late meeting. This wasn't some innocent dinner. This wasn't some misunderstanding or mistake. Rachel, my wife of 5 years, was cheating on me with Kyle. Kyle, the man who I had called my friend. The man who I had trusted. The man who had been a part of our lives for so long. Someone I had never suspected. He was supposed to be my friend, the one I confided in, the one I shared my deepest fears and biggest dreams with. The one I had trusted with my wife's career, the one who had always been there to give me advice, a smile, a handshake. And now I was watching him kiss my wife in the parking lot of a cheap motel. The very image of betrayal was burned into my mind. The pain, the gut-wrenching pain, of seeing them together was too much to bear. It felt like my entire body was filled with lead, like I was sinking into quicksand and couldn't escape. My vision blurred, and I had to blink hard to focus. It was like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from, a cruel reality I couldn't change. Rachel and Kyle, there they were, wrapped around each other, their bodies pressed together, lost in a kiss that wasn't just physical. It was intimate, too intimate. A kiss that spoke volumes, louder than any words they could ever say. And I stood there, frozen, unable to move, unable to look away. I watched them, my mind scrambling to make sense of it all. But the truth was impossible to deny. Rachel was mine no longer. She had already given herself to another man, my best friend. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and the people I trusted had just shattered. Every conversation we had, every plan we made, every promise we exchanged was now a lie. I realized, in that moment, that everything that had been built between Rachel and me was nothing but a facade. The room around me felt like it was spinning. I could almost hear the deafening silence in my ears, even though the world outside was completely still. My head felt heavy, like 1,000 thoughts were running through it all at once, each one more painful than the last. Why? How long had this been going on? How could she do this to me? I thought I knew Rachel. I thought I knew her better than anyone in the world. But now, I was looking at a woman who didn't just betray my trust, she was betraying us. And Kyle was the last person I ever would have imagined. The man who laughed with me at barbecues, who offered advice on my business ventures, who smiled as he stood next to me on my wedding day. That man was the one taking my wife away from me. I felt a surge of anger, but it wasn't like anything I'd ever felt before. It wasn't just the rage of being cheated on. It was the rage of realizing I had been living in the dark for so long. The anger that burned through me wasn't just at Rachel or at Kyle. It was at myself for not seeing it sooner, for ignoring the signs, for letting the trust one had in both of them cloud my judgment. I wanted to confront them right then and there, to storm into that parking lot and tear them apart with my words. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I sat there paralyzed, the world around me fading into the background. I felt like an observer in my own life. Everything was slipping away from me. The worst part was that I had already known. I had felt it in my gut every day for weeks. The way Rachel had started pulling away, the long hours at work, the phone calls she'd shield from me. I had been ignoring the signs, telling myself it was just stress, or that she was just busy. But deep down, I knew. I knew the moment she started acting differently that something wasn't right. And now, I had the proof. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind going in circles, unable to look away from the scene unfolding before me. Kyle and Rachel were walking back into the motel together, their hands intertwined like they were the only two people in the world. I knew that was it. There was no turning back now. There was no more pretending everything was fine. And the worst part? I had just watched the woman I loved, the woman I trusted, turn into someone I no longer recognized. Everything I had feared was suddenly real. My mind was spinning. Every inch of me felt like it was on fire. The images of Rachel and Kyle together burned into my brain like a cruel replay. I couldn't escape the memory of the way they touched each other, how natural it seemed for them. Their kiss, long and slow, wasn't just some fleeting moment. It wasn't just a mistake. No, this was a choice, a conscious, deliberate choice on both of their parts. And that realization cut deep. I wanted to scream. I wanted to storm into that motel, to burst through the door and confront them both right then and there. But I didn't. I couldn't. The anger in me was so raw, so intense, that if I confronted them now, I knew I'd do something I couldn't take back, something I'd regret for the rest of my life. I needed to stay calm. I needed to gather the strength to see this through without being driven by blind rage. But it was hard, so hard. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to do something, to shout, to break down the door and demand answers. But deep down, I knew that I couldn't. Not yet. I needed proof. Not just suspicions, not just my gut feeling. I needed the truth in front of me, something undeniable, something that would confirm what I had seen and give me the closure I needed. I couldn't be the fool who made accusations without knowing for sure. What if I was wrong? What if I had misunderstood? I had already seen too much to ignore it, but I knew I couldn't let my emotions cloud my judgment now. The storm inside me was threatening to explode, but I needed to take a step back. I needed to stay sharp. So I sat in my car, parked just far enough away to keep them from seeing me, my eyes glued to the motel entrance. The longer I sat there, the more the truth stung. My hands were shaking. I could feel the blood rushing in my ears as I thought about the life I had built with Rachel, the promises we had made, the future we had planned. How could she do this to me? I didn't know how long I had been sitting there, but it felt like an eternity. Every minute dragged, each second stretching out like a never-ending nightmare. My mind was racing, replaying every moment, every interaction I'd had with Rachel over the past few months. Was I really that blind? Had she been hiding this from me all this time? I looked at the motel again, my eyes narrowing as I saw Kyle walking into the building. His movements confident, deliberate. He didn't look nervous or guilty at all. He looked like he belonged there, like he had every right to be with her. My fists clenched, and I wanted to go after him. I wanted to yank him out of that building and make him pay for the betrayal. But I didn't move. I couldn't. I needed to know everything. It wasn't enough just to see them together. I needed to hear their words, hear their excuses, hear them confess. Because if I confronted them without proof, without knowing the full story, I knew Rachel would deny it, Kyle would deny it, and I would be left wondering whether I had just overreacted. And that would destroy me. I had to be sure. So I sat there, watching, waiting, trying to steady myself. My heart ached, but I couldn't let it show. My whole world had just crumbled in front of me, and I needed to make sure that when I walked away from this, I didn't leave any room for doubt. Minutes passed, then an hour. It felt like time had stopped, like the universe had paused just for me to confront the ugly truth I had been trying to avoid. The adrenaline coursed through me, making my hands shake, my legs restless. I was so close to knowing everything. And then Rachel came back out. Her face was flushed, her eyes darting around nervously, but she didn't look at the car. She didn't see me, but I saw her. She was adjusting her hair, quickly running her fingers through it, trying to look presentable, like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just betrayed me in the most brutal way possible. I felt the anger well up again, but I kept it buried. I couldn't lose control. Not now. She got in her car, looked around one more time, and then drove off. I waited a few more minutes, then started my car and followed her. The storm inside me was building again, but I knew the time for confrontation was coming. I had all the pieces. Now, it was just a matter of confronting her and ending this chapter of my life. They walked into the motel, hand in hand, like they didn't have a care in the world. Every step they took felt like a dagger in my chest, twisting deeper with every movement. The way Rachel's fingers intertwined with Kyle's, so effortlessly, so comfortably, was a sickening reminder of how far their betrayal had gone. They weren't just a couple of people meeting for a quick business discussion or a random encounter. No, this was something more intimate, more personal. They were together. My blood ran cold as I watched them walk toward the entrance, their heads bent toward each other, sharing a quiet laugh, oblivious to the fact that they were tearing apart everything I had ever known. I couldn't even bring myself to move, to breathe. My mind felt frozen, like the world had stopped spinning, leaving me trapped in a moment of time I could never escape. I watched them, my eyes locked on their figures, until they disappeared through the door. The last glimpse of Rachel, the woman I thought I knew, was her smile, a smile that wasn't meant for me, a smile that should have been mine. And then they were gone. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, motionless, my eyes still trained on the door they had walked through, waiting, watching, as if expecting them to come back out. But they didn't. They didn't even seem to notice the gravity of what they had just done. How could they? How could Rachel, my wife, be so cold, so disconnected from the man who had loved her? My heart was pounding, my pulse racing in my ears, but there was no escape. The reality of what I had just witnessed began to settle in, and I felt the sting of betrayal wash over me like a tidal wave. It wasn't just that she had kissed him, or even that she had spent time with him. No, it was the intimacy of it. The fact that she had chosen him, chosen to share herself with him, not just physically, but emotionally, in a way that made it clear this was something deep. I had spent so much of the last few months wondering, doubting, questioning myself, only for it to come down to this moment. The harsh, brutal truth standing in front of me. I had been blind. How had I not seen this? How had I missed the signs, the subtle changes in her behavior? The late nights, the secrecy with her phone, the way she pulled away whenever I got too close. It was all so obvious now. The cracks were there, but I had been too afraid to look closely, too afraid to face the possibility that the woman I loved was slipping away from me, into the arms of another man. The anger bubbled up inside me, but it was mixed with something else, a feeling I couldn't quite place. A mixture of hurt and disbelief, like a broken piece of my soul was being torn away with every passing second. But there was no time to dwell on that, no time to let the pain sink in. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there, paralyzed by the weight of what I had seen. I had to confront them. I couldn't let them continue to lie to me, to pretend like nothing was happening, like everything was fine. This wasn't just a small mistake. This wasn't something I could ignore. I started the car, my hands trembling, but there was no turning back now. I wasn't sure what I was going to say or how I would even approach this, but one thing was clear. I couldn't let them get away with this. As I drove away from the motel, my mind was in a frenzy. Every thought was clouded with images of Rachel and Kyle, their hands clasped together, their stolen moments of happiness. The images burned like fire in my brain, searing through me. But the one thing I knew for sure was that this was not going to end quietly. I had already been betrayed in the worst way possible. The storm inside me was building, and there was no way to stop it now. I couldn't wait any longer. The truth was suffocating me, every second dragging like a century. My mind was spinning with a mix of rage and disbelief. But more than anything, I knew I had to do something. I had to confront her, face to face, because there was no turning back. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I typed out a single message, my finger hovering over the screen for a moment before I hit send. I know where you are. I know what you're doing. It felt like the entire world paused in that moment. My thumb hovered above the send button for a second longer, as if trying to stop the avalanche of emotions that was about to come crashing down on me. But I had to do it. I had to send it. I hit send. The message was delivered. And then nothing. Silence. I sat there, staring at the screen, waiting for her response. My heart raced in my chest, each beat louder than the last. What would she say? Would she deny it? Would she try to lie her way out of it again? But deep down, I knew the truth. I had seen everything. I wasn't going to be gaslit again. There was no escaping the reality that had just unfolded before me. Minutes ticked by. My hands were clammy as I gripped the steering wheel, barely able to focus. I knew she had to have seen the message by now. What was taking her so long? Then the phone buzzed. It was a call. I glanced at the screen, seeing her name flash up. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't want to answer, but I had to. I had to face this head on. No more lies. No more pretending everything was fine. I pressed the button and brought the phone to my ear. What are you talking about? Rachel's voice came through, frantic and high-pitched, as though she had just been caught doing something she couldn't explain. But it was more than that. Her voice was filled with something else, something I couldn't quite place. Fear? Guilt? Regret? My blood ran cold as I heard her. The panic in her voice only confirmed everything I had seen, everything I knew in my gut. She knew what was coming. Don't play dumb, Rachel, I said, my voice steady but filled with an icy edge. I saw you. I saw everything. I saw you with Kyle. I felt a rush of anger, but I held it back. I had to stay in control. This wasn't going to be about losing my cool. This was about confronting the truth. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could practically hear her brain scrambling, her thoughts racing as she tried to come up with some excuse, some way to explain the mess she had made. Finally, she spoke, but her voice was different now, shaky. It's not what you think, I swear. Her words came out in a rushed, stammering mess. I could hear her trying to make excuses, trying to patch up the sinking ship she had built with Kyle. But I was done. I wasn't listening to the lies anymore. I interrupted her, my words sharp like a blade cutting through the noise. You don't get to do this, Rachel. My voice was low, each word deliberately slow, like I was speaking to someone I no longer recognized. I watched you with him, and now I want the truth. You can't lie your way out of this anymore. There was another long pause. I could almost hear her breathing faster now, and then the sound of nervous shuffling on the other end of the line. I could tell she was at a loss for words. She had no idea how to justify what she had done. Please don't do this. Her voice cracked. It was just a mistake. I never meant for it to happen. I cut her off again, the anger rising in me like a storm, but I wasn't going to let it take over. Not yet. A mistake? A mistake is forgetting to pick up the dry cleaning. A mistake is being late to dinner. This was a choice, Rachel. You chose this. You chose him over me. You chose this life over the life we built together. There was nothing left to say. No more words that could fix the hole she had just torn in my life. I had seen it with my own eyes. Her with him. It didn't matter what she said now. It didn't matter if she begged for forgiveness. The damage was done. I don't know who you are anymore, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. I'm done. I can't do this. And before she could say another word, I ended the call. I didn't want to hear her excuses, her promises that she would change, or her apologies. It was over. The storm inside me had been building, and now that I had heard her voice, that final admission, I knew I couldn't go back. There was no fixing this. No turning back to the way things were. I stared at my phone, my chest tight with a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. The realization settled over me. I had just lost my wife. Rachel tried to deny it, of course. Her voice, once familiar and warm, now carried a hint of desperation as she scrambled for an excuse. You're mistaken, she said quickly, her words faltering. You must be seeing things. This isn't what it looks like. I could hear the tremor in her voice, the fear bubbling beneath the surface. She was trying to act like nothing had happened, like the bombshell I had dropped on her hadn't shattered everything between us. But I wasn't buying it. Not anymore. I took a steady breath, letting the cold truth settle in. I looked her in the eyes, and with the calmest voice I could muster, I said, I saw everything, Rachel. I saw your car. I saw Kyle's car. I saw you kiss him. I saw you both walk into that motel room. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Rachel just stood there, her face going pale. I could see her mind racing, but there was no way out. The truth was staring her in the face, and she couldn't deny it anymore. The silence between us stretched on. I could hear her shallow breathing, her fingers twitching nervously at her sides. My heart was beating in my chest so loudly, it felt like it was echoing in my ears. But I stayed still, waiting for her response, though I knew deep down that there was nothing left to say. Then the shift came. She fell silent, her eyes locking onto the floor. I could almost see the weight of the truth crashing down on her. The act she had been putting on, the lies, the excuses, the feigned confusion, was falling apart, piece by piece. Finally, she spoke, but this time her voice was different. It was softer. It was real. Kyle wasn't just a colleague. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. The admission was more than just an acknowledgement of what I had seen. It was the end of everything I had known. He's been someone I'd been seeing behind your back for months. My stomach twisted as I heard her words. They weren't just a confession. They were a declaration of the reality that I had been living in a lie for so long. The man I had trusted, the one who had become such an integral part of our lives, had not only betrayed me, he had stolen something from me. The man I had trusted to protect Rachel's career, the one who had been a friend, had turned into the one who had taken my wife from me. And he didn't even have the decency to do it in private. No, he did it right in front of my eyes in the parking lot of a motel where I could see everything. Her confession hit me like a ton of bricks. My knees nearly gave out as the weight of it all crashed down. I had known, I had felt it deep inside me, but hearing it out loud, hearing her admit it, was something else entirely. She didn't apologize. There was no "I'm sorry" or "I never meant for it to happen." There was no attempt to justify her actions. No excuses. She simply admitted it. The truth was out there, hanging between us like a heavy, suffocating fog. And that was the moment I knew. I couldn't stay. There was no going back after this. The trust that had been built over 5 years was shattered in an instant, and the man I thought I knew was gone. Rachel was gone. The woman I had built a life with, the woman I had loved deeply, was now someone I didn't recognize. I looked at her one last time, standing there in the silence, her face streaked with tears. But there was no sympathy left in me. No more love. Just a cold, unyielding finality. I turned and walked away without a word. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't stay in a marriage where the truth had been hidden behind lies for so long. I couldn't be with someone who had broken me so completely. As I left the room, I knew that I had done the right thing, even if it was the hardest thing I had ever done. The pain would be there, yes, but it wouldn't last forever. I would heal. I would move on, and in the end, I would find someone who truly deserved my trust. I didn't know what came next, but I knew this. The worst was over. The truth had set me free, even if it didn't feel like it at the time. I would survive this, and somehow I would be stronger for it. Have you ever caught someone cheating? How did you find out? Drop your stories in the comments. Let's talk about it. And remember, sometimes the best revenge is simply walking away.